It was a Thursday evening like any other, or so I thought. The Texas heat had been merciless all day, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, a cooler breeze swept through the open windows of the house, bringing with it the scent of freshly cut grass from the yard. I had just come back from the dealership, still wearing my suit, a bit tired but content. Business was good, and I thought life was too. I poured myself a drink, a smooth bourbon, and sank into the worn leather armchair in the living room, taking in the quiet hum of the house. Megan was upstairs getting ready, though at the time I didn't think much of it. She always liked to keep herself looking good, something I admired about her, even after 20 years together. I was flipping through some paperwork from the office, nothing urgent, just enough to occupy my mind before dinner. Megan came down the stairs. I glanced up briefly, catching a glimpse of her in the corner of my eye. She was dressed up more than usual. A fitted dress that hugged her figure just right, her hair styled perfectly, and she wore that light floral perfume I'd bought her a few birthdays ago. It was the kind of outfit she'd wear for a night out with me, only tonight it wasn't for me. I set the papers down, taking another sip of my drink, curious but not concerned. "Jake, we need to talk," she said. There was a strange tightness in her voice, something I hadn't heard before. She stood by the entrance to the living room, arms crossed over her chest, a nervous tension clinging to her. I could feel something was coming. I put the glass down on the table, slowly, and leaned back in the chair, giving her my full attention. "All right, what's on your mind?" Megan stepped forward, but only a little, like she was afraid to get too close. Her eyes darted around the room, never quite meeting mine. That's when I felt it. Something was off. Really off. My gut twisted, and I braced myself. "I'm going out tonight," she started, her voice a little steadier now, but not by much. "With Tyler." Tyler? I knew the name. He was that smooth-talking real estate developer she worked with, a guy I'd seen a couple of times at her office events. Nothing more than a name in passing. But now his name hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, like she was gathering the courage to finish what she'd started. It's a date, Jake," she said, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the quiet of the room. "I've been spending a lot of time with him. We connect." She stopped, as if she had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her head, but now couldn't get the words out. "I think I need to figure out what I really want." I felt my grip tighten on the armrest, but I didn't let anything show on my face. I kept my breathing even, my expression calm, though every fiber of my being wanted to react, to say something, to demand an explanation. But I didn't. I just stared at her. She continued, mistaking my silence for compliance. "Tyler's been helping me through a lot of things I've been feeling lately. It's not about you, Jake. I've changed, and I need this. For me." I could see the flicker of guilt in her eyes, but she covered it quickly, straightening her shoulders as if she had justified it enough to herself. Megan was always good at convincing herself she was right. It was one of her more annoying traits, and I knew it all too well. I stood up slowly, watching as her eyes followed me. She expected me to be angry. I could tell. Maybe she even wanted me to be angry, to shout, to argue. But I wasn't going to give her that. I wouldn't let her think she had any control over how I felt. Instead, I walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. My gaze locked with hers, cold and unwavering. "If you continue with this," I said quietly, "you'll regret it." Her mouth opened slightly, and she blinked, clearly not expecting that. "Jake, I'm not asking for permission. I just wanted to be honest with you." "You're not being honest, Megan." I cut her off, my voice still calm, but firmer now. "You're lying to yourself. You think you know how this ends, but you don't. I know you, Megan. I know every flaw, every weakness, every insecurity you hide behind that smile. You've always been good at convincing yourself you're doing the right thing. But trust me on this. You will lose more than you can imagine." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the flicker of doubt pass over her face. But it was gone just as quickly as it came. Megan shook her head and stepped back, as if she was brushing off the weight of my words. "I have to do this, Jake," she said softly, more to herself than to me. I didn't stop her. I didn't argue. I just let her walk away. As the door closed behind her, the house fell into a silence, so thick it was almost suffocating. I stood there for a moment, processing everything. The bourbon still lingered on my tongue, but now it tasted bitter. She had no idea what was coming. But I did. I knew exactly how this was going to end. I walked back to my chair, picked up the glass, and drained it in one long, slow swallow. My mind was already turning, gears shifting into place as I began planning. There would be no begging, no second chances, no attempts to salvage what she was so eager to throw away. Megan thought she had the upper hand, but she didn't know me nearly as well as she thought. I had never been the kind of man to sit back and let life happen to me. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. No, this would play out on my terms, and when it was over, she would understand the full weight of her decision. As the clock ticked on, the house now fully enveloped in darkness, I sat back and allowed myself to think through every move I would make. Legally, personally, Megan would regret this, just like I said. The air was still, and the silence was deafening, but I was calm, unnervingly calm. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still buzzing from the night before. Megan hadn't come home, and I hadn't expected her to. After our conversation, or rather her announcement, I knew she would go through with it. That didn't bother me, though. I didn't toss and turn or lose sleep over it. In fact, I felt more awake and focused than I had in a long time. I had always been methodical. Life's curveballs never threw me off course for long, and this was no different. My plan was already forming as I stood in front of the mirror, tying my tie. Today would be the beginning of setting everything in motion. Megan thought she had control, but she was about to see what real control looked like. My first stop was Derek's office. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need to. Derek and I had always been close. He's the kind of guy you could call in the middle of the night and he'd answer with a sharp, "What's going on?" like he'd been expecting your call. He's a lawyer by trade, but more than that, he's someone who knows how to win. And right now, winning was exactly what I needed. I pulled up to his office, parked my car, and stepped inside. The receptionist gave me a polite nod. She knew me well enough to not bother with the usual small talk. "Mr. Reynolds is expecting you," she said, even though I hadn't made an appointment. Derek must have had the same instincts as me. He always knew when something big was brewing. I knocked once on his door and walked in. Derek was seated behind his desk, phone to his ear, gesturing for me to sit. His office was as sharp as he was sleek, modern, not a single thing out of place. It always felt like walking into the mind of a man who never let chaos touch him. "All right, I'll get back to you with those papers later today," he said into the phone, then hung up and turned his full attention to me. "So, what's this about, Jake? You don't look like a man who's here for a casual chat." I leaned back in the chair across from him, my hands clasped in front of me. "Megan seeing someone?" I said flatly. Derek raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem surprised. He was rarely surprised by anything. "I figured something was off the last time I saw you too. But now it's confirmed." "Yeah," I replied. "She told me last night. Didn't even try to hide it. She's going out with some real estate guy from her office. Name's Tyler." "Bold move," Derek said, leaning back in his chair. "What are you planning to do about it?" "That's why I'm here." I paused for a second, making sure I had my thoughts in order. I want to make sure she walks away with nothing. I don't care about saving the marriage. Hell, I'm already done with it. But I don't want her walking out of this thinking she got the upper hand. "We got a prenup, right?" Derek nodded. "We do. And it's solid. The infidelity clause will work in your favor, but only if you can prove she's been physically unfaithful. Her admitting it to you is a start, but it won't hold up on its own in court. We'll need hard evidence, photos, recordings, anything that shows she's with this Tyler guy in a way that can't be denied." "That's what I thought," I said, already mentally calculating the steps we'd need to take. "I don't want to leave any room for error. I want her out of my life, and I want full custody of the boys." Derek leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You've got a strong case for that. You've been a stable parent, the business is thriving, and you've provided a solid home for them. If we play this right, Megan's affair and the disruption she's caused will make it hard for her to argue for custody. But like I said, we need proof. I'll get in touch with a private investigator I've worked with before. He's good, quiet. You won't even know he's there." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my chest. The pieces were falling into place. Do it? The sooner we have the proof, the better. Derek's lips curled into a slight smile. Consider it done. But Jake, this isn't just about the legal side, is it? I know you. You've got something else on your mind. He was right. I had been thinking about it since the moment Megan walked out the door last night. I wasn't just going to take her to court. I wanted her to feel the consequences on a personal level, something she wouldn't forget. Something that would remind her of what she'd done every time she thought about it. There's more, I said, lowering my voice a bit. It's personal. Derek raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. You know about her issues, I said carefully. The dryness. Derek smirked. The reason you've been buying those special tubes. I nodded. Megan had always been self-conscious about it, and it was something I had never thrown in her face, not once in all the years we'd been together. I always respected that boundary, made sure she never felt embarrassed. But now I was going to use it. I'm going to get in her bag tonight, grab one of those tubes, and switch it up a bit. Add something that'll make her next night with Tyler memorable. Derek's eyes lit up with recognition. You're thinking something painful. Exactly. Liquid chili pepper extract. I'll inject it into the tube, and she won't even know it's there until it's too late. Derek chuckled, shaking his head. You've always had a ruthless side, Jake. But I like it. You're playing this smart. Get the proof we need for court, but make sure she feels every bit of it on the way there. That's the plan, I said, standing up from my chair. Let me know as soon as you get the investigator on it. Will do, Derek replied, standing as well. He came around the desk and clapped me on the shoulder. You've got this. Just keep your head straight, and we'll handle the rest. I nodded, feeling a calm settle over me. I walked out of Derek's office, knowing that things were in motion. The legal side was being handled, and tonight I would take care of the personal side. That evening, I waited for Megan to leave. She didn't say where she was going, but she didn't have to. I knew exactly where she was headed, and I knew exactly what she was planning to do. I watched her get ready, the same routine as always. Carefully applied makeup, the little black dress she knew would catch Tyler's eye, and of course, her favorite perfume. As I watched her go, I didn't say a word. Once she was gone, I went upstairs. Her bag was right where I thought it would be, sitting on the vanity in the bedroom. I opened it slowly, methodically, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. There it was, the small tube of lubricant she always kept with her, tucked away discreetly. I had everything I needed. I pulled the syringe out of my pocket, filled with the liquid chili pepper extract I'd bought that morning. Carefully, I injected it into the tube, making sure not to disturb the packaging too much. Everything had to look normal, just as it had before. When I was done, I sealed the bag and put it back exactly where I found it. Megan would never know what hit her, at least not until it was too late. And when it did, she would feel it, both in court and in her personal life. This wasn't about rage or revenge for the sake of it. This was about control, and I had it completely. As I walked back downstairs, I felt the calm wash over me again. Megan thought she was in charge of this story, but I had already written the ending. Over the next few days, everything began to fall into place, just as I expected. Megan came and went from the house like clockwork, never realizing how closely I was watching. She thought she had me fooled. She thought that I was the same man she had controlled for years, a man she could manipulate with half-truths and small betrayals. But I was always one step ahead. I always knew her better than she knew herself. That's why this plan was going to work perfectly. It was the second morning after our talk, and I was sitting at my desk, waiting for Derek's call. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't impatient. The plan was already in motion. Megan had left the house the night before, heading off to her usual date with Tyler, unaware that her actions were being watched, recorded, and photographed. Everything was playing out just as I predicted. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I glanced at the screen. Derek, right on time. I picked it up and leaned back in my chair. Got some news for me? I asked, my voice calm, but I could already sense what he was about to tell me. Max is on it, Derek said. He's got everything we need, photos, audio, all the evidence you could ask for. He followed her last night to the restaurant where she met Tyler. They spent about an hour there, all cozy, holding hands, whispering to each other like two high school kids sneaking around. After that, they went to a hotel. Max stayed long enough to see them check in, and then he called it a night. He got plenty of pictures. I allowed myself a small smile. This was exactly what I needed. Good, I said. And the audio? Crystal clear, Derek replied. He recorded her conversation at the restaurant. She was telling Tyler all about how conflicted she felt, but how she was tired of feeling like her life was in a rut. Said something about how she felt more alive with him than she had in years. It's all there. Perfect, I muttered, already picturing how this would play out in court. Megan might have convinced herself that she was in control, that her actions were justified, but the cold reality would hit her soon enough. Max will have everything ready for you by tonight, Derek continued. You'll have all the evidence in your hands. Once you've got it, we can start moving on the legal side. Thanks, Derek. You've outdone yourself. Just doing what I do best, he said with a slight chuckle. But Jake, remember, this isn't just about winning. You want to make sure that you come out of this looking like the good guy. Don't let her drag you into any emotional mess. Stay focused. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Don't worry about that. I've got this under control. After we hung up, I sat back, letting the weight of the situation settle over me. It was strange, really. I should have felt something more, maybe some sense of sadness or regret for how things had turned out. After all, Megan and I had built a life together, at least on the surface. But now, sitting here with the knowledge of her betrayal, all I felt was a cold sense of purpose. A purpose I intended to see through until the end. That evening, Max delivered everything just as promised. He was a quiet man, efficient and unassuming. Exactly the type of person you'd want for this kind of job. He handed me a folder, thick with photographs, and a flash drive containing the audio recordings. I flipped through the pictures, my eyes scanning the images of Megan and Tyler together. There they were, sitting close at the restaurant, her hand on his, their heads leaned in as they spoke in low tones. They looked like any other couple out on a date, except they weren't. They left the restaurant and checked into a hotel, Max said, his voice steady and businesslike. I've got the timestamp photos of them going inside. They didn't leave together until this morning. I nodded, satisfied. You've done good work. Max didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just gave a short nod. I'll be in touch if you need anything else. After he left, I sat alone in my office, the evidence spread out before me. Each photo, each recording was a nail in the coffin of the life Megan thought she was living. She believed that she could have this affair, keep up appearances, and that I would either accept it or fall apart. But she had no idea how far I was willing to go to dismantle everything she had built with Tyler. This was just the beginning. I didn't confront her that night. In fact, I made sure to act as if nothing had changed. When Megan came home, probably after some excuse about working late, I simply greeted her, asked her if she had eaten, and went about my evening. I wasn't ready to play my hand just yet. The timing had to be perfect. She needed to think she still had control, that I was too blind or too passive to see through her lies. That's what made the next part of my plan so satisfying. Megan had no idea what was coming, both legally and personally. She had gone off to her little hotel tryst, thinking she could do whatever she pleased, but the moment she reached for that tube of lubricant, well, she was about to find out just how much control she didn't have. The next morning, Megan acted like nothing had happened. She moved around the kitchen, making coffee, pretending everything was fine. I watched her out of the corner of my eye as I skimmed through the morning paper, waiting for her to slip up, waiting for the signs. She would be heading to work soon, and I knew it wouldn't be long before she would need that little tube. Hours passed, and I went about my day as usual, though my mind was never far from what was happening in the background. I went to the dealership, checked in with my staff, and handled business like it was just another normal day. But I knew that the clock was ticking. It was late afternoon when the text came through. Megan had messaged me, short and simple. Something's come up. I won't be home until late. I smirked at my phone. Of course. She was going to meet Tyler again, no doubt planning another rendezvous. That would be her second mistake. As evening fell, I settled back in my chair, waiting for the inevitable. The chili pepper extract I'd injected into that tube would be working its way into her life soon enough. I had no doubt she'd be in for a surprise, something that wouldn't just leave a physical sting, but a psychological one. She wouldn't be able to understand what had happened, and that confusion would turn into panic. The plan was already set in motion, but now it was time to bring everything to the surface. I wanted to see Megan squirm, not just figuratively, but literally. This was the moment where all her delusions of control would start to crumble. The chili pepper, the evidence, the slow unraveling of her false reality. It was all building toward this conversation, and I'd chosen the perfect place for it. I decided to meet her at Le Grand, a high-end restaurant in downtown Dallas, the kind of place where people dress like they had money to burn, but rarely did. It was polished, pristine, and far removed from anything Megan could afford on her own. A fitting stage for her to feel out of place, off balance. I made the reservation and sent her a message. Dinner at Le Grand, 8 p.m. Let's talk. It didn't take long for her to respond. Fine. See you there. I arrived a little early, making sure everything was in order. The maitre d' greeted me by name, and I was escorted to a private corner table, one that overlooked the city through a floor-to-ceiling window. The evening lights were just beginning to sparkle, giving the city that familiar buzz. I sipped a glass of whiskey as I waited, watching the door for her arrival. She walked in exactly at 8, wearing a black dress, another one of her efforts to appear sophisticated and control. I almost smiled at the irony. She was putting on a performance, but I knew the cracks were starting to show. She had no idea how much I had seen, how much I had prepared. As Megan sat down, she glanced around the restaurant, her eyes sweeping over the elegant decor. I could tell she was trying to settle herself, trying to project confidence. But I knew her too well. I could sense the unease, the discomfort in the way she sat a little too straight, the way she adjusted her hair twice before speaking. You didn't waste any time picking a place, did you? She said, a forced smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. This is a bit much, don't you think? I raised an eyebrow, swirling the whiskey in my glass. I thought you'd appreciate the atmosphere. It's fitting, don't you think? She gave me a sharp look, but I didn't let her rattle me. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone casual. We need to talk about how this is going to go. It's time to make things clear. Megan shifted in her seat, crossing her legs as she folded her hands in her lap. I'm listening, she said, trying to maintain her usual air of control. But there was something else there too, a flicker of uncertainty. I didn't waste time. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a set of preliminary divorce papers, sliding them across the table toward her. I watched her eyes widen slightly as she looked down at them. I'm filing for divorce, Megan, I said evenly. I'm also filing for full custody of the boys. And you'll be walking away with nothing. Her eyes shot up to meet mine, a mix of disbelief and anger flashing across her face. Nothing? Are you kidding me, Jake? I haven't done anything to deserve that. You can't just throw me out like some. You broke the prenuptial agreement. I cut her off, my voice steady but firm. It's all there in black and white. Infidelity means you walk away with nothing. No spousal support. No claim to my assets. And you sure as hell aren't getting the house. Megan's face flushed, her eyes narrowing as she processed what I was saying. Jake, come on. This is ridiculous. It's not like I've done anything that bad. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I leaned back in my chair, studying her, watching as the confidence she was trying to hold on to began to slip. I'm not blowing anything out of proportion. I've got the evidence, Megan. Pictures, audio recordings, everything. You've been sneaking around with Tyler, and I've got all the proof I need to make sure you don't see a dime of my money. And trust me, the court won't be on your side. Her lips parted in shock, and I could see the realization dawning on her. She hadn't expected this. She thought I was still in the dark, that I was going to roll over and let her play her little games. But I had been watching every move, every step, and now the walls were closing in on her. You had me followed? She stammered, her voice betraying the panic she was trying to suppress. Of course I did, I said calmly. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you could just parade around with Tyler, and I wouldn't notice? You've been sloppy, Megan, and now you're going to pay the price for it. She opened her mouth to respond, but something else caught her attention. I could see her body stiffen slightly, her face tightening. Megan shifted in her seat again, more urgently this time. I kept my eyes on her, waiting, knowing exactly what was happening. Jake, she started, her voice strained. I think something's wrong. I I raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. Oh, what's the matter? She fidgeted in her chair, her face turning a shade darker. I don't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. I think it's something I used earlier, like a reaction or something. I'm not feeling right. I leaned forward slightly, watching her closely. A reaction? From what? She shifted again, her legs moving beneath the table, her hands pressing into her lap. Her breathing was shallow, and I could see the discomfort growing. It's that she hesitated, glancing around the restaurant as if she were suddenly aware of the people nearby. She lowered her voice. It's the lubricant, Jake. Did you do something to it? There was the moment I'd been waiting for. I kept my expression neutral, even as satisfaction curled inside me. I shrugged, leaning back in my chair. Lubricant? I have no idea what you're talking about, I said smoothly. Maybe you should ask Tyler. Could be something you picked up from him. You never know with these things, right? Her eyes widened in horror, and I could see the realization of what I had just implied settle over her like a storm. She gripped the edge of the table, struggling to keep her composure as the discomfort turned to pain. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. Suddenly, Megan pushed her chair back, standing up a little too quickly. I need to go, she muttered, her voice shaking. I can't. Without waiting for my response, she hurried away from the table, her hand clutched tightly to her stomach as she practically stumbled toward the exit. I watched her go, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. The entire restaurant seemed oblivious to what had just happened, but I had seen it all. The chili pepper extract was doing its job, and the best part? She didn't know whether to blame me or Tyler. It was perfect. The days following our meeting at Le Grand passed in relative silence, though I knew that silence was deceptive. Megan was boiling underneath the surface. I didn't need to hear her complaints or see her frustration to know that the sting from the chili pepper was still haunting her. She hadn't mentioned it since she left the restaurant in a flurry of pain and confusion, but I knew that moment had planted seeds of paranoia in her mind. She wasn't stupid. She would have connected the dots by now, but the beauty of it was that she couldn't say for sure. That was what was driving her crazy. I could see it in the way she moved around the house, restless, avoiding my eyes, her jaw tight whenever we happened to cross paths in the hall or the kitchen. There was an anger in her now, simmering, waiting to explode. I knew the explosion was coming. I was just waiting for it. It happened that weekend, right after breakfast. The boys were in their rooms upstairs, and I was sitting in the living room, enjoying my second cup of coffee, reading through a few notes from work. The house was quiet, too quiet. I could feel the tension building before I even heard her footsteps. Megan was pacing upstairs, her steps heavy, her movements erratic. Then, without warning, she stormed down the stairs and barged into the living room, eyes blazing. I glanced up from the paper I was reading, knowing immediately that this was it. The confrontation. You did something, she hissed, standing in the middle of the room like a woman possessed. I raised an eyebrow, setting my coffee cup down calmly on the table beside me. Good morning to you too, Megan. Don't you dare act like you don't know what I'm talking about, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She took a step closer, her eyes burning with accusation. You did something to me. That night, you put something in my stuff. My lubricant. You did this to me. I didn't say anything at first. I just leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as I looked at her, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. Her face was flushed, a mix of anger and desperation twisting her features. She was unraveling, and she didn't even realize how satisfying it was to watch. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm, almost too calm. I have no idea what you're talking about, Megan. You liar, she spat, her voice trembling with rage. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I've never felt like that before. I know it was you. You did something to that tube. I don't know how, but you did. I couldn't help it. I smirked. It was a small, cold smirk, one that I knew would hit her harder than any words could. Maybe, I said slowly, savoring the moment. You should ask your lover if he's been tested for STDs recently. Could be something he gave you. The words hit her like a slap, and I saw the shock ripple across her face. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out for a moment. She was too stunned, too caught off guard by my casual cruelty. I watched her carefully, waiting for her next move. She recoiled, stumbling back a step as if I had physically struck her. "You bastard," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. She hadn't expected that from me, and that was what made it all the sweeter. She'd spent years thinking she had me pegged, that I was predictable, manageable. But she was starting to realize how wrong she had been. Just as she opened her mouth to fire back, we both heard footsteps behind us. I looked up and saw Connor and Dylan standing in the doorway, watching us with confused expressions. They must have overheard the argument. I hadn't planned on involving them, not yet, but I wasn't about to stop the moment from unfolding. "What's going on?" Connor asked, his eyes shifting between me and Megan. Megan's face twisted as she tried to pull herself together. She forced a smile, but it was brittle, almost painful to look at. "It's nothing, boys," she said, her voice faltering. "Just a misunderstanding between your dad and me." But Connor didn't buy it. He stepped forward, his expression hardening. "No, Mom, we're not stupid. We've seen how things are. You've been spending more time with that guy, Tyler, than you have with us or Dad. We're not blind." Megan looked like she'd been punched in the gut. Her eyes widened as she stared at Connor, trying to process what he was saying. "Connor, it's not like that." But Connor wasn't finished. He looked back at me, and then at her, his voice firm, unwavering. "We know what's going on. We're not kids anymore. We know who we want to stay with." The room seemed to freeze for a moment. Megan stood there, frozen, as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Her sons, her last hope of keeping some part of her life intact, were slipping away from her, and she knew it. I watched the realization dawn on her, watched the way her shoulders slumped, her entire posture crumbling as she realized what was happening. Dylan, who had been standing quietly beside his brother, nodded in agreement. "We love Dad," he said, his voice soft but clear, "and we want to live with him." Megan's breath hitched, her eyes darting between the two boys. She looked desperate now, panicked. "But, boys, I love you both so much," she whispered, reaching out as if trying to pull them back. Connor didn't even blink. His voice was ice cold as he cut her off. "Maybe you should have thought of that before spending all your time with someone else." That was it. That was the final blow. Megan stood there, utterly defeated, her arms dropping to her sides as if all the fight had been drained from her. She looked at me, her eyes searching for something, anything, but I didn't give her what she wanted. I just watched, impassive, cold, knowing that I had won. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She was losing everything, and she knew it. Without another word, Connor and Dylan walked over to me, standing by my side, their loyalty clear. Megan stood there, speechless, her face pale, her body trembling as she tried to hold on to what little was left of her dignity. But it was too late. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just looked at her, letting her feel the weight of her own choices, letting her see the consequences of what she had done. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, the sound of the door slamming behind her echoing through the house. The silence that followed was heavy, but I didn't mind it. I had waited for this moment, planned for it, and now it had arrived. Megan was losing everything: her marriage, her family, and most of all, the respect of her sons. The day of the trial had finally come. As I drove through the streets of Dallas that morning, everything felt strangely still. It wasn't a heavy stillness, not the kind that weighs on you. It was more of a quiet certainty. The culmination of everything I had set into motion, everything I had worked toward, was about to unfold. Megan had no idea what was waiting for her. Not really. She probably thought she could talk her way out of this, find some sympathy, or play the victim. But today, the truth would come crashing down in front of her like a tidal wave, and there'd be no escaping it. I arrived at the courthouse with Derek by my side. He was as sharp as ever, suited up and ready for battle. We didn't exchange many words on the way in. We didn't need to. We'd been over the strategy, the evidence, the witnesses. It was all in place, and I trusted him to do what he did best. He had that look in his eye, the same one I'd seen before when he was on the verge of winning a case, that mix of cool confidence and razor-sharp focus. We made our way through the corridors, passing by other people in varying stages of their own legal dramas, each one engrossed in their little world of conflict. But all I could think about was what was waiting behind those courtroom doors. Megan. When I entered, I spotted her instantly. She was sitting at the front, fidgeting with a piece of paper in her hands. She looked smaller somehow, like a shadow of the woman she once was. Her hair wasn't as polished as it usually was, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She was still wearing a suit, probably an attempt to look composed and put together, but it only made her seem more out of place in the cold, sterile environment of the courtroom. And then there was Tyler. He was sitting a few rows behind her, hunched over, looking uncomfortable, as if he were regretting every decision that had led him to this point. I almost smiled. He'd promised Megan the world, whispered sweet nothings into her ear, probably fed her some nonsense about leaving me and starting fresh. But here he was, unwilling to get too close now that the truth was out in the open. His discomfort was palpable. I could see the weight of his other affairs bearing down on him, all his lies unraveling right before his eyes. Derek leaned in toward me as we sat down. "Everything's set," he whispered. "This will be quick." I nodded, keeping my eyes on Megan. She hadn't looked my way yet, but I could see the tension in her movements. She knew what was coming. The judge entered, and the trial began. There was no unnecessary fanfare, no theatrics, just the cold, hard presentation of facts. Derek was masterful. He laid out the evidence with surgical precision. The photographs of Megan and Tyler together at the restaurant, holding hands, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. The audio recordings of their conversations, Megan talking about how she needed to find herself and how Tyler made her feel alive again. And finally, the hotel records, timestamp photos of them entering the building together late at night and leaving early the next morning. It was all there, laid out piece by piece, a clear and undeniable picture of betrayal. Megan sat there, staring down at the table, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair as Derek outlined how the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement left her with nothing. No spousal support, no claim to my assets. It was over before it even began. When it was Megan's turn to speak, she tried. She really did. She stood up, her voice shaky but determined, and attempted to explain that the affair hadn't been serious, that she had just been confused, trying to figure out her own happiness. She talked about how she still loved the boys, how she still wanted to be their mother. It was a pitiful sight, really. I could hear the desperation in her words, but they rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Then came Tyler's turn. He had to take the stand. I watched him shift nervously as he made his way up there, clearly wishing he could be anywhere else. When Derek questioned him, it didn't take long for his lies to unravel. Tyler wasn't just some innocent bystander in this mess. It came out in excruciating detail that he had been involved in multiple affairs, not just with Megan but with other women as well, even while he had been stringing her along with promises of a future together. Megan's face fell further with every revelation. Tyler's testimony wasn't helping her. It was only sinking her deeper into the mess she had created. I could see her gripping the arms of her chair, her knuckles turning white as she realized how alone she truly was. Tyler wasn't going to save her. He wasn't her ticket out. He was nothing more than a coward trying to cover his own tracks. But the final blow came when Connor and Dylan were called to speak. Megan's face drained of color as the boys walked to the front of the courtroom. They had been quiet for most of the proceedings, sitting in the back with me, watching everything unfold. But now it was their turn. Connor spoke first. He was composed, steady, just like I knew he would be. "Dad's been there for us through everything," he said, his voice clear and strong. "We trust him, and we want to stay with him." Megan's eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't. Then Dylan spoke. His voice was softer, but no less powerful. "We love Mom," he said, glancing at her, "but things aren't the same anymore. We feel safer with Dad." There it was. The truth laid bare. Megan's heart visibly shattered in front of everyone, but there was nothing she could do. The boys had made their choice, and the court took notice. The judge, who had been listening carefully throughout the trial, made his decision swiftly. Full custody of the boys was awarded to me. Megan would have visitation rights, but she would no longer have any say in their day-to-day lives. The house was mine, the majority of our assets mine. The prenuptial agreement was upheld, and Megan, already broken and humiliated, was left with nothing. I watched her as the verdict was read. She didn't even lift her head. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, as if she couldn't bear to face what she had brought upon herself. Tyler was already slinking toward the exit, trying to distance himself from the wreckage as quickly as possible. He wouldn't be sticking around for her. Not after everything had come to light. He wasn't that kind of man. As the courtroom began to empty, Derek turned to me, a satisfied grin on his face. "You did it," he said, patting me on the back. "You've got everything you need now." I nodded, watching Megan stand slowly, her movements robotic, hollow. She looked like a ghost, a shadow of the woman who had once thought she could have it all. Now she had nothing, nothing but regret. "Yeah," I said quietly, my voice steady. "And she's got nothing." Megan shuffled out of the courtroom, her head down, her once confident stride now reduced to a defeated shuffle. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served was enough. This was never about revenge. It was about control. Control over my life, my family, and my future. And now, that control was firmly back in my hands. As I walked out of the courtroom with Connor and Dylan by my side, I felt a deep sense of calm settle over me. This chapter was finally closed. There would be no more lies, no more betrayal, no more games. Megan had made her choices, and now she would live with the consequences. And me? I had won. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.